BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hi, welcome to Raw. My name's Dave and I'm an archivist here at the BBC. And over the last year or so, I've unearthed a collection of interviews with some of the biggest names in music from the last 4 decades. Some of which have never been heard in full, until now. On this episode...
I'm hardly one to talk because my cover versions are usually quite dreadful.
It's early 1983, and a 36-year-old David Bowie has recently released his classic single, Let's Dance. He's feeling fresh and incredibly well-travelled, and thankfully, the legendary Kid Jensen was on hand to hear all about it.
You were looking so fit, so tanned. I mean, what have you been doing to look so well?
I just got back from Australia to do I was doing the promo videos for some of the tracks of the new album out there. And that was something like 116 degrees heat in the bush. But then I seem to have spent the last 6 months in hot climes. I was in Rarotonga before that on the Oshima movie. So I've been back and forth from there, so I've inevitably got tanned.
I was going to ask you about the video. Presumably Let's Dance then, the single, that video was done in Australia too.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Who are those people?
I wanted to work with Aborigines, but not in a kind of a cliche context. I didn't want them to be dressed up in war paint or tribal gear, and that's something they're terribly against at the moment as well. And so I wanted to find a couple of just really pleasant-looking, young, modern people who happen to be Aborigines. One of them goes to a dance school and the other one's a boyfriend or something, named Terry and Jolene. And I just thought they're such natural stars. I mean, they're wonderful kids. They've never acted before in their lives, and they're just perfect for this thing that I wanted to do.
Right. Now you're back in Britain. I mean, do you come back often as a private person at all?
No, I seem to... Well, I've been back quite a few times, yeah, privately, but only for a couple of days or a weekend or something.
Is that ever difficult for you to come back privately, though? Because there are always photographers at airports waiting.
No, I have absolutely no problem coming in and out. I've been through London many times without people know. I mean, it's very easy to avoid all that. I guess it's how much you want your photograph taken.
I mean, do you still think of Britain as home, then?
No, I don't. No, I guess I've become far more international in terms of living. I feel quite at home in just about anywhere now, on a temporary basis.
Where do you spend most of your time?
Again, what is most of one's time? Over the last year, it's been London, New York, South Pacific, Australia, Africa, and occasionally Switzerland. I mean, that's been this year. And this coming year, for the next 6 months, it'll be just about every city in the world.
So it's not important to you to have a roots or a home base?
I don't feel it. No, I'm not really a roots person in terms of home.
It's interesting to find someone as successful as you obviously are in your chosen fields, and plural, to be as busy as you are. I mean, what keeps you going? Because you've had success, haven't you? And you've and all that means. But yet you want to keep working. I mean, it's a fairly grueling schedule doing all this touring.
Yes, it is. The reason I want to tour is that I've not toured for 5 or 6 years, and it really is exciting now again. And it got to a point where I just couldn't get very excited about doing the 100th gig on a 200 city tour. I mean, it was just one tour after another, and the excitement went for me. And it's taken all this time to get to a point where I really want to tour again.
The other question that I know the press has asked you millions of times, but I haven't heard the answer myself, is that after so many successful years and records with RCA, you've changed. You're now with EMI America.
Yes.
So why the change?
By the end of my contract with RCA, there was no love lost between us. We didn't... I think the belief had gone in each other. I didn't believe in RCA, and they certainly had fallen out with me around the time of Low. There was no real interest in Low, and many of the albums from there on. And it was sort of, we just went through the movements of being artist and record company, so I was really quite glad when I was able to terminate. that particular contract.
I mean, I find that unbelievable because any record company, any other record company would have been glad to sort of take you on because, I mean, you're the sort of artist who keeps a lot of lesser-known artists afloat.
I think familiarity had bred contempt. I mean, we're quite happy to take a short space from each other, a long space from each other.
All right, then. How do you react, then, to the numerous Decca and the RCA reissues that have cropped up in the last couple of years in the absence of new material from you? These sort of releases that, in fact, chart in the UK.
I think they're horrendous. I think the compilations are done, they sound like they were done in about half an hour over a board meeting or something. Packaging is generally atrocious. And I find it most offensive.
What about the Rarities album, the Italian compilation that came out? Is that as well?
I'm not quite sure what the point of it is, except to maybe pick up a few extra bucks or something. I mean, it really is something. If they'd wanted a compilation, they should have come to me and asked me to put something together for them, and I would have given them something very interesting. But of course, they don't ask me these things, they just put them out. And I dare say they will continue to put out compilations of albums, which I have absolutely no understanding or control of.
Do you have a record yourself of all the things that you've ever recorded? Do you have a collection of all your work?
No, I'm not a very good back fan. I get a lot of stuff. I mean, a lot of my audience are really good like that. They send into the New York office an awful lot of stuff that they think I might not have heard. So I've heard and know about just about every bootleg that's been done. Mm-hmm. And I've even had studio tracks in the early days that I didn't know existed come through to me. Very early version of, what was it, I'm Waiting for the Man, which I did in somewhere like, it was about 1970, a 1970s version of that, which floored me. I can't remember doing it to this day, and it's definitely me.
Amazing.
It's quite definitely me.
What about other memorabilia or paraphernalia, like a stylophone, for example, that you used in Space Oddity? Do you have anything like that?
I probably have that. Things I've got, I think, every item of clothing I've ever worn. I always keep that stuff. I can't, stuff like that, I find I'm very reluctant to throw away. I've got all the very early Kansai costumes and all the early stuff in the Rainbow and the stuff that was specially made and all the Dada-looking things. I've got all that.
What about the Ziggy Stardust period? Now that seems to be, musically, for a lot of people today who always quote you as being a prime influence. Does that seem, the Ziggy Stardust fella himself, is he a long time ago in a far-off place, or is he still fairly fresh to you?
I find him very refreshing to look at. I mean, it's an extraordinary, it was an extraordinary phenomenon in rock at that time. I can't really relate to the kind of enthusiasm I must have had for him at the time. I'm very much divorced in that situation. It is hard to connect with that. But that's been with purpose. I've really cut myself off purposely from that situation, because for so many years it hindered my own physical and emotional state, and it was such a hard thing to try and live his life. It was not pleasant, so I really closed the door on him.
Now, as I said, people constantly quote you as being a major influence on their own music, notably Gary Newman, Japan, the Human League. I mean, do you see your own influence when you hear records by these other people, particularly coming out of Great Britain?
Yes, I do. I do see those influences.
Yeah. Do you ever play any other, I mean, modern, you were talking about the R&B stuff.
Yeah.
Are you aware, do you keep up to date with what's happening in this country?
No, I get a lot of those things very second-hand.
What about the Bauhaus record? In a session for us, they did one of your songs, they did Ziggy Stardust.
Yes.
That later became a single. Have you heard that?
Yes, I got that a couple of weeks ago. I'm not very...
How about the Bauhaus single? What was your reaction to that? Did you enjoy what they had done?
It was a shock to hear Ziggy Stardust being revived by anybody other than myself. I must admit that. I don't think it was that successful. I'm not quite sure why they did a cover version. But there again, I'm hardly one to talk, because my cover versions are usually quite dreadful. I can only think of a few that I quite like.
Well, name one, then we can play something.
Can't Explain, from the Pin-Ups album, I like.
David Bowie and his version of Pin-Ups of Can't Explain It. I remember meeting you in France when you were recording that album.
That's right,
well.
yes, at jovial.
That's right, yeah, sure. And you've recorded with other people, of course, over the years,
yeah.
Notably Bing Crosby and Queen and John Lennon. I mean, is there anybody that you can think of that you'd really like to do a duet with, that you haven't worked with, that you would like to
absolutely
do
no one. There never was in the first place. These things just seem to come about. I've never really wanted to record with other people. These things just sort of happened. I can't think of anybody offhand that I would. Yes, it would be a lot of fun, with absolutely no purpose, but a lot of fun to make a record with Kraftwerk. That would be fun.
Last year, our listeners would have seen you in a BBC television production of Bertolt Brecht's Ball. What was it about this play that attracted you to it?
I think the role was much stronger in the reading than it was in actual presentation. Although, looking back on it and having seen it since its broadcast, I find it a very strong piece of television, but not very accessible. It's not an accessible format to shoot that long range. I mean, his cameras, Alan's cameras were almost in the next studio. I mean, it was talk about long shots, and it was very hard to see the action because it was sort of characters were so diminutive on the screen. But the role itself, I found an interesting role to get into. I mean, he was such a gregarious, loud person, and it was sort of such an emotional cripple. When I look at roles, they either have to have an emotional or a physical limp. That's the kind of role that interests me.
Presumably you are turning down scripts all the time now that people, ever since you did the first movie and when you appeared on stage in The Elephant Man, you must be inundated with scripts all the time. And I was going to ask you what you're looking for in a script.
Well, up until Elephant Man, it was the same role I was turning down time after time. It's usually a green Martian who plays rock and roll music, but the Elephant Man sort of changed that. Now it's a green Martian who limps. No, the roles have been getting more interesting over the last few years, and culminating with the Oshima role of Celia's in Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, which to date has been the most fulfilling thing I've done.
And when will we see that?
That's in, I think, it goes to the Cannes Film Festival in May, and then probably opens up in London after that. I'm very excited about that one.
Is there any music at all in it?
Yeah, the music's by Sakamoto from Yellow Magic Orchestra.
Oh, sure.
And it has a sort of Javanese feel, because the thing is set in Java, in a prisoner of war camp, Japanese prisoner of war camp.
Now, working obviously on stage like The Elephant Man, I guess is a bit more like being on stage making music as opposed to being on location doing a film. Do you know any stage fear at all? Because I saw you on television in America when you were doing The Elephant Man, and I thought, this is really brave, and you carried it off with the same kind of conviction you would carry off performing in some music, perhaps.
First night of Elephant Man was probably the most frightening stage thing for me ever.
Well, it is the most demanding role I have ever seen anyone take on, certainly.
I was terrified before going on stage with that thing.
I think listeners who are not aware should know that you played The Elephant Man without any kind of makeup. There was you were yourself on stage, but you threw yourself into this character, and it was easy to forget that you were watching David Bowie, and I thought that was its success.
It was the disorders were intimated rather than seen, yeah. I think that is the thing with John Merrick, the character, is that the deformities were so awful that it would be hard to see past those deformities and see the real person. If that was what you were faced with on stage, you'd be continually looking at the makeup job and seeing the actor trying to come out of it. A problem, I presume, that John Hurt had to contend with when he did the film version. On stage, I think, in fact, it helped not to have the makeup. In fact, it didn't hinder it at all.
What about the other movie you've done then? Because you mentioned something you're pleased with, which is Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence,
yeah.
which we should be seeing in the springtime. What about The Hunger?
The Hunger, again, for me, was successful in terms of the very thing I've just been saying. Oh, dear. It's a makeup job. I have to work through layers and layers of plastic. But I think the success of that is that because he's an older man, about 300 years old, the makeup that Dick Smith did for that is so incredibly real that he made it work on muscle to muscle. If I move a muscle of my face, it's reflected in the makeup itself, and it's quite the most sensational makeup. It's fantastic.
You're playing an old man in this.
Yeah. Well, he ages from about from his mid-30s to about 300 in about 2.5 days, I think.
Why? Can you tell us anything about it?
It's a little vampire experience, and his time clock goes wrong because he's not a real vampire. He was made into a vampire, and as we all know, real vampires can stay around forever, but the pretenders don't last above 300 years or something. It's a funny little piece.
And that is out this year as well?
That comes out this year. I think that's quite soon, actually. I think that's about March or April release.
And sure. Catherine Deneuve is in it.
Catherine Deneuve is in it, and Susan Sarandon, who's Susan in particular. Catherine is excellent, but Susan Sarandon for me is absolutely extraordinary. She's a great actress, fabulous actress.
And again, I'll ask you if there's any of your music in the film.
No. I tried not to incorporate any of my music in any of the films where I'm supposed to be taking on the part of a role.
Just to keep it totally divorced, then.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about the new album finally now. Has this been a long time in the making? It certainly has been a while since we had a new album, but did it take you a while to record it?
No, it was put together in 3 weeks because I had a very good idea of what I wanted to do. So it's a very simple operation to actually execute it in the studio. The arrangements were done before we went in.
Would you describe it as a dance album? The title track is certainly danceable. Is the album with a similar theme?
I think you could dance to about everything on it, but really Let's Dance is, by virtue of its title and the instrumental makeup, the only real dance track on it.
Is it all your own material as well?
No, some of it is by others. I did a cover version of, half others actually, a song that I did write with Iggy Pop called China Girl. Mm-hmm. That's one of the tracks. And one track that I didn't write, in fact, was by I think they're a London band, I might be wrong, called Metro.
They had a single out called Criminal World a few years ago.
That's the song that I covered on the album. I always thought that was a wonderful song.
Yeah, so did I. I remember that on Transatlantic Records.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah. Wasn't that to Peter Godwin, I think, wrote the song? Because
right.
I think he comes from Bury St Edmunds.
Bury St Edmunds?
Yes.
Oh, is that right? I thought it was London. I covered that one, but other than that, Cat People, which I wrote with Moroder. Mm-hmm. The Metro thing is the only thing that I covered by somebody else.
Right, okay, and this album is coming out sometime mid-April,
Yes.
Right. Now, about the stage show, and this is what everybody can't wait to see, and it was sold out within hours of being announced in London and in Birmingham, and if you've got some European dates as well.
Yeah.
The Serious Moonlight tour, now it's the line I know in Let's Dance, Serious Moonlight. What is it a whole concept, a moonlight or a moonlit concept?
Yeah, I wanted something which would give a general atmosphere to the tour. A Serious Moonlight for me, it's the romanticism, it's the inherent quality of two people being together, a relationship between two people that I wanted to retain what I feel is the positive force on the new album, which is trying to see the world through the eyes of a couple, and I want to retain that kind of feeling for stage, that it's on a more humanist level than anything I've done on stage before. It's not quite so icy.
That's what I remember best when you came with the Station to Station tour, and it was very icy.
Yeah.
My palms were in fact sweating because the support was not an act as such, but rather a film, the Chien Andalou.
Yeah.
And that was really unnerving, and I was thinking,
Yes,
God, what have we got in store here? What have I let myself in for
I was
here?
reflecting my own personality at the time, unfortunately. Those days are long gone.
Are you going to be doing any old material on stage this time?
I think I will probably be able to cameo just about every period that I've been involved in as a writer. I still find it very enjoyable to do a lot of the old material. I've changed the instrumentation on some of the pieces because they don't excite me as such anymore. So I've had to do something to make them exciting for me, otherwise I wouldn't be able to perform them with any real conviction. So I've made some allowances for that. But I've covered everything, I think, back to Man Who Sold the World, I think.
Wow. All right. Well, I'd like to thank you for your time here. And perhaps you might suggest a track. This is going to be difficult, but one of your older numbers that still gives you a real kick to do on stage where you perhaps haven't had to change it that much.
Crikey. That's all I can say to that.
Is there something that...
I guess Revel.
All right, we'll play us out with that. And I look forward to seeing you in June in London.
Okay,
all right.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The late, great David Bowie from 1983.